Albert Einstein said, "Don't think about why you question, simply don't stop questioning." Welcome to Curated Questions. I am your host, Ken Woodward. And these questions are not mathematical equations, but rather a resource to encounter personal reflection and growth. As Tupac Shakur stated, even the genius asks questions. Now, let's engage the questioning community. Greetings, Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I am a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you're here. Today's conversation is with Brian Fretwell. That's spelled F-R-E-T-W-E-L-L. Brian is the founder of Finding Good, a company dedicated to helping people have more meaningful conversations. His methodology uses the science behind connection to make listening less transactional and more transformational. Brian has spent his life exploring how listening can be the most effective tool for change when we use the right questions. As a teacher in juvenile corrections, he saw how better questions can influence behavior. As a facilitator and consultant in mining, oil, and gas companies, he helped people see how better listening can help save lives. Today, he works with individuals, entire school districts, and large organizations to develop stronger connections through the power of questions. His TEDx talk has generated over 2.5 million views, and his social media posts have also garnered millions of views. I've been following Brian's work on Instagram for the last 18 months and saved many for future reference. This is going to be a different kind of episode. Instead of me interviewing Brian, he's going to interview me. He recently posted about his interest in joining podcast hosts to do a, quote, reverse interview. I had been planning to have this kind of conversation when I found the right partner. I'm certain that Brian is that person. Additionally, I need to walk the talk and thought this would be an opportunity to model what engaging with questions looks like. The bulk of the conversation will be Brian asking me questions, and in the latter portion, Brian will explain the tools and techniques he used during the conversation. Stay tuned at the end of the episode. Brian offers a discount to his Finding Good beginner course. Brian, welcome to Curated Questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Excited to be here. Yeah.
It's good to have you here. And as I said in the intro, I had been planning on doing this kind of a discussion. And based on all of your work, I'm confident that you're the right person to have this conversation with. So thank you for saying yes, and thank you for joining the community here.
Yeah, that's interesting. You say you're planning to have this kind of discussion. What do you mean?
If I'm only interviewing people, then rarely would the audience understand any of my story. There'd be only little bits and pieces throughout. I knew that in order to have a concise story, I'd be able to refer back to this one and go, in this one, you got it all.
And I think I love that we start out with that, because I think that it can be an anchoring point to think about when we just think about questions broadly. The ability to share our story often rests on the curiosity of those around us. Like, had someone not asked us the question about our story, when and where and how do we get to share that? Yeah, in a way that feels valuable. We tend to share our story if we're in sales and we want to have our elevator pitch, or we're the leader and we want to build credibility. And those are all important, but there's something that changes, and we can talk about that throughout the podcast, but there's something fundamentally different that happens for both the listener and the person talking when another person is authentically interested in our story. And so much of our framework is built around the idea that having somebody authentically interested in our story is as necessary as food and water for human beings to survive. And we could talk about the science in there encoded, but the easiest way to look at that is Surgeon General outlines loneliness as the biggest epidemic. If we have nowhere to share our story, or rather we don't think anybody values our story, then we are by rule lonely. Yeah.
As I've had different opportunities to engage with people in different conversations, it truly is amazing at how few times people get to tell their story. And so when you show that curiosity, literally folks light up and they're like, wait a second, you're actually paying attention and you are giving me eye contact and actually interested. And it quickly gets to, I've never told anyone this before. And you're like, almost, how did I get there that quick? And it's loneliness thing. They're starving for it.
Yeah, I think that it's what we look at, and one of the things we really stress is we've been conditioned to believe that adding value is about giving our story or giving our, we have an acronym, SOFA, giving our suggestions, opinion, how we add value to the pack, if you will, or to the group or to a relationship is by telling our story. And while there is value in that, and there is value in our opinions and our advice, and there's a place for that, what I believe is more valuable, and this is really after 4 years of changing how I look at perspective or how I look at questions and how we approach another person's story, if I know what I'm looking for, has as much or more value than telling my story. And we're hardwired to look at it, but we've been conditioned to not see the value in someone else's story outside of helping them feel better because they told it. And how we approach these conversations and questions and how we look at connection is having somebody else share their story with me is actually how my brain understands how we survive, that other people's story have inherent value for us. We've just stopped understanding how to find that value.
I've read Kurt Thompson's book, The Soul of Shame. And I remember him talking about how when we are talking with someone and they are sharing something shameful, it helps them to relieve that burden, but also there is a healing that happens with us, and the shame kind of identifies in us and helps weaken that sense of shame internally. And it was actually after I read that, a longtime friend I had commuted into DC with, we made a promise to each other that on all of our trips in and out, I would talk on the way in and tell my entire life story. And he would talk on the way out and tell his life story. And in DC, that meant that we had plenty of time to talk. But we'd go through each and everything that we could think of just to tell that story and give it voice at least one time with no judgment, but just witnessing. It was very cathartic to actually be able to say some of the things that I had never said before.
Yeah. When we look at the idea of storytelling, my wife is a counselor. And so that ability to tell the shame story or some of those, like there's inherent benefit of that with your counselor or with a friend or those. One of the things that I looked at is if I'm getting somebody else to tell their story, I don't actually have, unless they've asked me to ask them, if you will, then asking somebody about their most shameful experience or their most embarrassing experience or the hardest things that ever happened to them, I don't necessarily have permission for that unless they've, again, asked me. And it's one of the things that I see out there with other folks is that we understand vulnerability and Brene Brown's work in that space. And I think some people take that and say, well, how you prove you're a friend is sharing your most vulnerable thing. And I know Brene Brown speaks directly against that. But I see that often, and I think I see it often because people don't know what else to ask. And while there is benefit in sharing the shame story, I often really encourage people to go to their counselor, to a person that is capable or that is trained to handle that. There is benefit there. What we found, and I think the thing that changed my life, but my focus on it is it actually requires a high level of vulnerability to share the thing you're proud of. And we even go even further that like it might be easier for most people. And we know this based on our brain's negativity bias. And generally when I'm in a group, I'll give you an option of sharing two things with this group before you know anybody. The first option is you tell them the thing you screwed up on the most in the last month. And the second option is you tell them the thing that you did the best in the last month. And which one do you think most people choose? Which one is less dangerous?
Even when you started, I was thinking it is easier for me to share the shameful thing from a preventing the ego running away or not wanting to appear boastful, because
Mhm.
that's a bit of the world in which we operate is, don't be that guy.
Yeah.
So in thinking in that question, I would say the things where it's like, don't take the first answer. Whatever comes
Right.
up, because I helped the little old lady across the street.
Mhm.
Okay, set that one aside.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, what did you do well, or what are you proud of?
Yeah.
Okay.
And not only is it harder to say, it's harder to think about, right? If I ask you what you screwed up on, and I said just start talking about what you screwed up on, we'll still be here a half hour. That's all of us, because our brain has this negativity bias. 70% of our thoughts are negative. You wake up at 10 o'clock at night in a cold sweat thinking about the embarrassing thing you said in fifth grade. Nobody stays up at night at 10 o'clock right before they were going to bed because they can't stop thinking about the awesome thing they did that week, right? Or how cool, how the thing they're most proud of doing, all of those things. Um, and while there are things we have shame about, or we do bad that are absolutely scary to say out loud, because but it has to do with what we've given the other person, like what the other person can weaponize. And it's often harder to weaponize the thing I screwed up on. And if you had brothers and sisters growing up, you understand that when you say the thing you're proud about, or you say the thing you think you do well, you understand that you've given the other person ammunition. And that's like the sibling thing, but it can also be, a lot of us have those sort of deep rooted experiences. I know for me, I grew up and I was wrestling, I played football, and that was how I got acceptance, or rather, more aptly put, belonging, right? But I also really enjoyed drama. I was actually going to state competitions the first 2 years of high school. And then I was put in a position where I had to choose between one or the other. And quite frankly, I was much better at drama. I was an awkward football player. Like, I got size more when I was in college playing rugby. But I remember specifically an older football player saying, just like, is this what you really wanted? Are you really going to be a drama person? And so here was this thing I like now being used against me. And I didn't sign up for a play or anything else for the rest of high school, and really not even into college. And now today, I'm like, boy, I wonder, what would have happened there. But it just reinforces that idea that when we talk about vulnerability, we don't often talk about how much vulnerability is required to tell the part of our story we're proud about, tell the part of our story that identifies our strengths and our values, and where we're confident, and how we got over challenges. Not just the challenge itself, but how we responded to it. And I think those are the stories that have the most value for us. Not that the others don't, but the more I understand how you got over a challenge, or how you were able to do something that you're proud about, the easier it is for me to do. And because that's how humans learn, right? How many times we watched a movie and walked away inspired to do something new. And yet that movie is available in every person we talk to, right? Because they've all overcome challenges. We've all reached goals. We've all had to get back up off the floor, whatever the case might be. And yet we're conditioned not to go and find those stories.
Great insight. Yeah, I guess all that studying that you're doing is paying off, right? Or all the work you've been doing.
I've been looking at questions my whole life. I did a TED Talk back in, 2017 or 2018? I don't remember. And I've used them as a facilitator and as a coach. And I've got really good over time in changing people's reframing, changing their perspective, drawing them into places like we can use it as a really good tool. But it was when the pandemic happened that we started to look at questions through the context of connection, and which then changed how we had to see the value in a question is not because I'm getting you to change behavior, and it's not because you get to be heard. It's because this is access to the thing we all need. And so questions are a way of me getting the thing that I can't get if I'm just using questions to make you feel better or to change your behavior. But I can make you feel better and change your behavior while getting what I need. And that's the thing I think most of us don't do. And I know in 4 years of developing this, I walk away from plenty of conversations realizing I missed an opportunity to do it myself. And I think we're just very conditioned to look at listening in a one-directional manner and not really understand like how much value there is in accessing somebody's what we call success story, right? And there isn't just one success story. There are multiples. There are success stories today.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right.
We call that process success mapping. And there's tons and tons of iterations of where to do it, how it applies. But the basic understanding is there is inherent value in understanding how somebody looks at success specifically through their experience. So instead of tell me your definition of success, it's really tell me where you felt it. And then that's where the conversation starts, right?
Yeah, that's interesting to think of not what is your definition, but where have you felt success?
We call it experience versus projection. If I ask you what your goals are or what your definition of success is, the answer tends to be performative. Not that you're not being authentic, right? But it's a projection. Yeah. Here's what I think it is. Here's what I think my goals are. But it's a projection because it's not right now. Yeah. Even though it is my goal right now, a goal is inherently future oriented. So it's a projection. And it doesn't necessarily tell you, you can assume things about me, but me telling you my goals and my opinion doesn't actually tell you anything about me. It tells you things that you can assume based on your own experience. So if I tell you my opinion, your experience says, here's how this person came to that opinion, whether or not you know that or not, right? Because that's the only way we can look at that. And because our brain is limited to our own experiences. And that's the lens through which we make the assumption, oh, you have this opinion, you have this goal, you have this whatever future-oriented thing, you must be blah based on my experience. And so I don't understand you. I don't really understand you more. I'm not more connected with you per se. I'm this sort of transactional connection that's based on an assumption of my own experience. So if you say you like this football team and it happens to be the same one as me, we can feel like we're connected because what we're doing is assuming that our experiences are the same.
Yeah.
But if I say, tell me the best experience you had at a football game, that's going to tell me so much more about who you are relative to this thing that maybe we both care about.
Yeah.
And that changes how we understand each other and how we connect with each other. But we're very much conditioned to say, what's your favorite team? What do you like? What do you want? All these sort of future-oriented questions. I'm not saying that they don't have value, but I am saying that when we think about the things that have more value and lead to higher states of connectedness, it's almost exclusively experience. And there is so much more depth and area to explore. Experiences never get boring if we know what we're looking for. Opinions get boring the moment they come out of your mouth. We have all sat around those tables listening to everybody talk about their opinion or what they saw in the news and their opinion of the news or their opinion of the weather. And that's fine. But there is just something much more memorable and meaningful. And when we really get into the science, much more transformative when we are connecting at the level of experience.
Nice.
Which is where we should start. Yeah.
Cool. Let's do it.
So just for context for everyone, we do a process called success mapping. And that really is, we have this people, well, I want to be authentic with my questions. And I often challenge them like, well, authentic and habitual from a neuroscience standpoint are really overlapping, meaning just because something feels natural might just mean it's because you're habitually, you've done it a lot, not because it's quote unquote authentic, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so the drive to this authentic question, this thing that organically comes up is that might just be more what you're comfortable with and what your habit says, right? And so we create some frameworks to help people create a new habit for what is comfortable. Because as you're going to see, some of the questions that we'll explore are not just going to be uncomfortable for you, they're uncomfortable for me to ask. And we'll talk through that as we go. But they're authentic from the standpoint of what we are exclusively trying to do that most of us have never been taught when listening. All of us have been taught to listen, but pay attention, make eye contact, right? Reflect, reframe. And we start with one single rule: ask about the thing you're actually interested in. And if you can be really clear about what you're interested in and lead with that, all those other things you do to listen, pay attention, eye contact, happen naturally, because all of those are us imitating what we know being interested actually looks like. So we can shortcut all of that if we know how to be interested. Right? As opposed to how to look interested. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to start. We kind of have a process for success mapping. I won't walk through that. We'll just do it. And then we'll talk about what we did. Cool. Because often it looks different every single time we do it. Right?
Nice.
So for me, the interest, and we had a little conversation before, Ken, when you had talked about you started the podcast in 2019, took a little time off, and then started it again. And I'm curious about, what was the experience? I'm assuming it's prior to 2019. If you think about like the reason you started the podcast, can you tell me the actual experience that kicked that into being? Like maybe it was an interaction with somebody. If you had to say, this is the day that I moved from kind of being curious about it till I'm going to do this podcast, what day would you pick?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to say a day, but let me glom together some things that made that the case. I've had experiences where questions really mattered to me. And when I felt that shift in me, so at a time that I was very much, it was a dark period in my life and really struggling, went to some very dark places. And it was a question that I thought of that shook me out of it. And that question was, but what would you miss? What laughter would you miss if you make some of these other decisions that you're considering? And those demons have not returned.
If you can take me to when that happened, where did that question come from?
Because I have heard so often, and that's a bunch of what the framing stuff around curated questions is that I kept hearing people saying things like, change your questions, change your life, or some variation of that. And so then when I started really interacting with questions, whether it was through journaling, because I've done journaling over the years, or various kind of self-improvement type things to try to understand a bit more of who I am, then that's where I saw some of the power of questions. And this one here is an example of, for me, the application of a question had a significant impact on me. This was like in the 2017 timeframe. And so then I truly see the value of how this can have a monumental shift. And then I've done small group things. Go ahead.
Do you mind if we stay into this one
Please.
For a little bit? Yeah, I'm curious, what was different about that day? Because what I heard is that you've heard questions like this a lot prior to this day.
Yeah.
What was it different that you were doing, or like, what was, because it sounds like you reacted different to it than, because it sounds like you heard it before. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, I heard some variation of that question, certainly. I would say I was looking for hope. I was looking for some way to say no to the things that were going around in my head. That was the piece of hope.
Well, this is, sorry, I'm just like sort of beside myself in as much as like, when you're in a dark spot, how do you know you were looking for hope? Like what, and this two-parter maybe, what was driving you to look for hope?
Because I didn't think that, because perhaps I was not in as deep of a hole as I thought that I was. And if in that hole of depression, ideations, different things like that, I was as deep into that hole as I had ever been. So I'm sure that others have been deeper. So my assumption is that whatever level in that hole that I was at was probably not the ultimate bottom, because there was some level of me saying, I don't want to be here and I need to change something. And I know that this is all internal. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is interesting because it feels like it might be new ground for both. Certainly new ground for me because I don't ever heard this story, right? Because what I hear right there is you said I may not have been as low as I wasn't, right? So I didn't have something, right? What did you have, whether you were at the bottom or not? What is it that you actually had, whether or not you were in the bottom, like kind of like more of? What is it that you had that allowed you to seek the hope?
From all outward appearance, life is good.
Yeah.
And so,
but the thing that you, if you were to describe it in a strength, you were at the bottom, but you still had some sort of strength that allowed you to, because looking for hope in there sounds like an action, right?
yes, agree.
And what strength would be needed to be able to do that action?
So in that question, what I chuckle is that I'm like, okay, so that action or that strength, okay, this is beautiful. I'm seeing the point here. So, okay, that now means that it's a muscle that can be reused. Okay, beautiful. All right, I see how this is working. Okay, I think, check me on this. Perhaps it was gratitude that I just wasn't recognizing, perhaps. And yeah, I'm going to need you to tease this out for me. So if it's gratitude, maybe that's what was there that I didn't know. As for the things around me, because I said kind of from all outward view, everything looks good. And so perhaps it was a moment of recognizing gratitude for what I did have, vice what I don't have. Because at that point I was thinking predominantly about what I don't have.
So that gratitude for what you had sounds like helped you convince yourself that there was something more. Is that?
Yes, I think that's the
or helped
case.
You believe that more was there? What do you think?
Well, I think that it would have been, but that would have been more projection is how it would have been going in through my head, because I would have said, the question was, what might I miss? Right? I was thinking about what laughter might I miss if I go a different direction. So that was very much forward looking, not so much.
Yeah.
Or it was forward looking, but it was based on the awareness of the current circumstances outside, or that I did have in the current circumstances, not what I didn't have in the current circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. That I can only lose something if I know I've had something. Right. So if it's gratitude, tell me where that came from. How did you develop that prior to that situation?
I'm slow to say that I developed it because, and when I say that, I mean, because I think of gratitude practice, all these different, things
Sure.
that you do intentionally to develop
Yeah, yeah,
gratitude. And I don't necessarily have a history of that.
yeah.
So this almost, yeah, that's how I would check the box to say this is what I did intentionally. And I
Were there things you did unintentionally that you think developed that strength of gratitude? Like, were there practices, were there daily ways you approach something, or maybe even just something you developed like when you were a kid that was this habit that stayed with you?
I think it just comes back to, in general, I'm generally optimistic, and in relationship to others, I I enjoy connection, and I find most joy when I'm connecting with others. And I have lots of evidence for that, right?
Yeah.
So I think in my thinking there, it was all the things I might miss out on if I make other decisions. And that's that connection. Those are the relationships, the laughter, whatever that is, because I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what it looks like 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And if I go this other direction, then I, as a human, am going to miss out on that, whatever that
And
is.
so the gratitude is specifically about gratitude for connection.
That is where I find the most joy.
Yeah, so the development of gratitude then, like, if you think about how that strength might have come from how you connected before.
Yes.
And so when you think about prior to that situation where you use gratitude to find hope, what converse can you think about like prior to that, one or two, like a connection, maybe even a conversation that, like, when you think about this conversation helped me feel grateful for conversations, what is there one that comes to mind?
Well, like the one that I'd mentioned with the buddy of mine as we were driving in and out of the city. I mean, even as we were telling our stories to each other, although we had hit the dark spots, there was a lot of bright spots and laughter and being able to witness someone and live
And
with
you,
them.
and what's interesting is you said that was a practice, right? You did that one person one way, the other person the
Yes.
other way, right?
Yep.
And it sounds like, how long did you do that practice?
So we didn't commute every day together, but it was
Sure.
probably let's say up to 5 times a month or something like that. But we did that over the course of, it's probably a year.
Yeah. So you went to like the gratitude weight room like 5 times a month for a year,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
just through connection. Yeah.
Right.
Which is really interesting to consider. And so just to kind of wrap this back, what I hear is you're real interested in questions came from how it saved you, but also how you saved yourself in there because you built this strength with gratitude. And so, like, here's where it happened, here's how you drove it. That strength of gratitude for connection that impacted your life, I'm curious, can you think about who is one person, maybe it's this person that you talked about in the car, who's one person whose life is better because you have this strength?
That an easy one is that buddy of mine. And
Mm-hmm.
I've got other evidence as well through other connections, friendships. Folks have communicated that before, is that our relationships, we've got good relationships. And
And,
go ahead.
and when you think about that one person that you were in, what does that person have? What did that person end up with more of? Because we can describe, we have a better relationship, but that's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
what did they have more of because of those interactions?
So putting some words in David's mouth, because that's always fun
Sure.
to do. He has someone that knows him and is able to explore the edges of the human experience without judgment.
Mm.
So as he's wrestled with some things, not the same kind of things, but just different parts of his identity, that being able to talk things through without the judgment, but to be able, like I say, to kind of push on the edges of that. Well, what does that mean? And like, I know that he has felt that sense of, go back to connection, but just being seen for who he is.
Mm. Which likely gives him hope.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
use that word specifically because when we started, we said, what got you to start this podcast? And we talked about this moment where you found hope at the bottom that was developed from this gratitude that you unknowingly had been building through these interactions. And that gratitude that gave you hope has given someone else hope. And it sounds like that is the story that then drove you to be able to start the podcast.
Yes. That sounds about right.
Now, what I was curious about, has you ever thought about the story in that way?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So that's what we would call a success map, right? There's different iterations of this, but it's really trying to unpack the story. We actually started at the end and worked back to the beginning because the end of the map would always be based on what you experienced. What could you do? Well, what we did was start with, here's something you did do. Where did that come from? Right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. And we can still progress that into, again, like what can you do with it here? But I thought that starting with the thing we already knew you did more in figuring out the story behind how it was done. And that I would imagine there's other stories that influenced your ability to, the decision and the drive to start the podcast. But now we understand the story from a uniquely you perspective, right? And probably one of the bigger drivers that got that to happen. Yeah. So I'm curious. Yeah.
Wow.
So this is where we can unpack what happened and talk through, but I'm also curious right out of the gate. Tell me about your experience being on the other end of the questions this time.
Mm-hmm. This is good stuff. This is the kind of thing I was hoping for in the conversation. Using questions well, what does that actually look like? So I appreciate that.
I think in this context, and the reason I have always ask that follow-up question, like, have you ever thought about your story in this way? And the response is often no. And that response is predictable simply because your brain isn't really designed to think about your story that way. Your brain is designed to relook at your story from the standpoint of what you need to improve, what you screwed up on, what you need to do better. That's a survival mechanism, right? I need to know if I got rejected from the pack and how to fix that. And so that's what we stay up night worrying about. The connection is so important because the story of the Blueberries, many people have probably seen on the social media, the idea that as if we were in the same pack and you went out and found blueberries today and brought them back and we ate them, and that's fantastic. Well, when you come back, your brain is hyper-focused on, I could have got more. What could I have done better? And we've all felt that after we finish a goal, right? Within 5 minutes, we're, self-analyzing, right? Yep. And that's fine individually. But for me to survive, if you went and found blueberries and came back, for me to increase my chances of survival, I don't need to know what you could have improved on as much as I need to know how you found them, where you found them, what skill it took to find them, how you kept pushing, how you did it and didn't get eaten by the bear. I need to know the story of success so I can replicate that. And in doing that, it allows your brain the opportunity to do something it won't necessarily do on its own, or won't rather automatically do on its own. We can consciously go back and sort of, we would call it reframe the story, but I don't think that, for me, I call it getting the more complete story. Your brain is looking at the story from at least 70% negative, because that's how it keeps you alive. The other 20 or 30%, that reward toward state, doesn't get so much amplification, but it's that part of the story, what you would do again, what you did, like how you explained, right, how you develop gratitude. There's going to be people listening to this and be like, holy, I guess I might be doing that in these interactions. And I didn't think that could be, because you even said it. Well, I think about gratitude as a gratitude journal or a daily practice. And your brain did not see the thing you had just told me minutes ago about this drive back and forth with a friend. Your brain did not recognize that as a practice that was building a strength that you would use in a really important time in your life. It didn't recognize that as a practice and a strength. Yeah. But for me, when I'm curious about it, for the other person listening to the story, if I'm going to get value out of that story, I need to know where that came from. And so now we're looking at how you found the blueberries in a whole different, in a way that you've never looked or I have. Not because I'm trying to make you feel better, even though hopefully that happens.
Yeah.
But because we're looking for the objective story, right? We're investigating, and what we call this is validating. We investigate when something went wrong. We validate how something went right? And so that process is, like for me, it's not asking the right questions. It's like, I want to understand how you did that, because I might be in a low point myself. And when you said I was looking for hope while I was at my low point, I was like, wait, we need to understand this. Right? And so the curiosity is, again, that's where the curiosity is authentic, because I have an application for it, if you will, right? Like I'm leading with my interest.
Right.
Which we always call that, when people are first learning to do that, we say, we can call this selfish listening for a while, because it's going to feel really selfish. Because we're not, again, conditioned to lead with our interest. We're conditioned to lead with what we think the other person is interested in. The challenge with that is that's a projection. We can only think what they're interested based on our experience, right? And so that change in like being deeply interested in the story because you see the value in that story for yourself is the thing that helps the other person feel. And that's often my second question is, when you think about people, when you've been asked questions by people, while I was asking questions, at any time, how interested did you feel I was? Which is a really weird question to ask, right?
That is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that question. That is a true test of the relationship, because as I'm hearing that question, I'm like, if I was asked it, then am I going to answer truthfully? Right? If I saw you distracted, am I willing to tell you that truth?
Sure. Right.
Hopefully you'd be expecting it, ready for that or not, one way or the other. But yeah, that's a test for the relationship to go, no, you really weren't paying attention. I get it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you legitimately, I was feeling it. It seemed like that was the case.
Yeah. And some of the ways to actually get into a more, I don't want to say measurable way of doing that is like, how many times did you think to yourself, I'm talking too much? Because I'll bet it didn't happen. And I asked that because how many times have you been in the situation where somebody asked you about the hard thing you were going through, the challenge, you're like, hey, I just want to listen to you. And you found yourself like 5 or 10 minutes in the conversation, like, sorry, I'm dumping all my stuff on you. Like we've all experienced that.
Yeah.
And that is very highly correlated to how interested the other person is. And I don't mean that from a standpoint of like showing interest. I mean that from the standpoint of this story is like me talking right now is only valuable to me. And this person is being a good person. This person is being a nice, compassionate person, listening, giving me that space. And I'm not saying for a second we shouldn't do that. I'm saying it's hard for the person telling the story when I know that the only value of telling that story is for me. It might help this person feel like they're being a good person, but the person isn't deriving value from hearing my experience. And for that to happen, the person has to have an understanding of what the value of the experience they're listening to is. And it can sound really selfish, but it changes the experience for the person being heard in a fundamental way. Because every one of us have been in the middle of telling somebody a story and we realize that person isn't paying attention. Right? Or the person's judging us, or worse, but to be with another human being that is like deeply interested in that story, not simply because they're trying to be a good friend or trying to be a good person or trying to help, but they're interested in that story because they're getting value out of it, which that value could be learning, that could be excitement, that could be interest, engagement, whatever the case might be. That the person is listening to us the way they would be engaged in their favorite movie or their favorite podcast, right? Like that they don't have to read, like they're genuinely, and we see that, like some of the signs of that are the questions they ask. It's not just how they're paying attention. We see it in the neurobiological reactions of leaning forward and how the person's interacting and engaging, but we see it most in the questions they're asking. And we've been taught to show interest and not taught to be interested. Because to be interested requires a little bit more thought. It requires a lot more intention.
Right. So seems like that's a whole world.
Yeah, we just went down a rabbit hole, didn't we?
Oh, yeah. My thought is, so do we go down the path of how to be, I'm assuming that's something like active listening, or there's probably some discipline out there that says, this is how you do that better and you're not checked out in your conversation. And if you're sitting on the couch with your partner, you don't want to be that person. Figure, how can we foster that? How can I grow in that? Right? What does that look like for me if I recognize that I haven't asked any questions, or that I'm more thinking about the sports score? Then I'm like, okay, personal growth moment. There's an opportunity here. Clearly I'm not listening. Any thoughts on either how to foster it, or do we want to go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah. Always start with small changes, right? Like every single person this week, even today, has asked somebody like, how was your day? And I posit that you don't care. Yeah, you're almost.
Yeah, let me jump in real, because I never ask going down the hallway, how are you? I always say, good to see you. And 9 times out of 10, somebody will walk by and say, good. And then they're 10 feet back.
It's transactional.
Like, but what did I just say? How did that work? Yeah. But I'm like, in a conversation passing in the hall, how are you is not a conversation to be had. But I can honestly say, good to see you. I can say that with all integrity.
And that's the intention. And there's a lot of benefits in what we call transactional interactions. Yeah. And we actually have a bit of a framework that we think about, like how to get more interested. So when I say, when you ask, how was your day? And I tell people, you're not interested, they always push back. Like, well, I am interested in my kid. And I said, well, what we're doing, whether you're asking your kid or your spouse or coworker, what we actually have to do is separate 2 things, right? So your brain has 2 primary goals: not be eaten by the bear and sleep. So it's looking for efficiency and it's looking for safety. And so when we talk about interest, we're actually talking about 2 different things in conversation. One is, do I care about the person? That's the safety piece. Yeah, like we've all been asked a question of somebody that we know isn't concerned of our safety. Yeah, oh, what happened in there? And so when I say you're not interested, I'm not talking about you don't care. But what happens with most of us when we ask, how was your day? And especially like parents or partners that we ask, and we want them to tell us whatever they want to tell us, so that in the telling us about their day, they feel like we care, right? That's the intention that we have that we're not generally conscious of. that I care about you and you can talk about whatever you want. Now, what happens on the other side is the person says, oh, I know you care about me. I don't need to waste energy unpacking parts of my day that you're not going to be interested. And I know you're not going to be interested because I personally think these parts are boring anyway. Why would I tell you something boring that's boring to me when all you actually want to do in this interaction is show me that you care? And so what's interesting is you found a workaround, right? You, instead of how's your day, you're saying, I hope you're doing good, right? Which is, I'm going to show you I care. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, when we think about this model, there's 4 stages. And so there's, I don't care about the person and I'm not interested. And this is the other piece we don't think about. I'm not interested in the story and I don't care about the person. These are like completely transactional. They're just a stage above a grunt. They might not even be, right? Hey, right? That's fine. I don't like, we're just not fighting. It's kind of what we're, right? And we, tons of those conversations all day long.
Yeah.
Then that next phase that we kind of outlined, I care about you, but I haven't shown interest in the story. Because I've asked, how was your day, which I've asked 100 times, again, I'm just telling you I care about you, which is fine. But what happens is we then ask it expecting to hear a story, but we haven't done any additional work, and we're asking this person to do additional work. What I mean by work is, how much energy did it take me to think to ask you, how was your day? About this much.
Yeah, not much.
And so guess how much energy I'm getting in response? The same. Because you showing me you care is about this exchange of energy, very low, because we're safe, because we've been in a relationship for a while. Like, I'm fine, you're fine. And again, I'm not going to waste energy telling you a story that I don't think you're going to be interested in anyway, because this is just what happens to me every day, right?
Yep.
Now we move it to interest, but I don't care. So this is, I call this a TMZ reporter. This is the gossiping. Yeah. Oh, tell me what happened, but I don't care if it gets you in trouble. Oh, tell me about how this is. The salespeople do this, right? Oh, tell me about how your kids are. You don't care, Bob. You're just trying to get me to say something. So, right? And we feel that. We feel the I don't care part. Yeah. Now, the 4th quadrant, right? We call the real value exchange here. I care about you and I'm interested. And this is where where the conversations start to actually give the other person's brain and our brain what they need to fully engage. I need safety and I need a reason to burn energy for me to then get my brain to start processing a story. So just a simple shift, like one of the easiest ways to do that is when you go home at the end of the day, instead of how was your day, tell me the best part of your day. Or if that is too much right out of the gate for the other person, like, oh, that's a lot of interest and I'm only here, like, what? Tell me one good thing that happened in your day. And I can make it easy. I can even elaborate why I'm interested. Hey, I had a really rough day. Can you tell me one good thing that happened in your day so I don't think the world sucks? Right? Like, notice how that changes the energy.
Yeah.
Like, now it's made it easier for you to, oh, okay, here's why I'm burning this energy, which is, again, your brain's efficiency saying, oh, I need to know why, and I need to know what you're going to do with it, like if I'm safe. Yeah. And so in the relationship, we can play with those, that safety and, hey, when you're ready, I would really like to know how you're keeping your head above water today. So now I've acknowledged that you're challenged and I'm giving you the safety of, hey, when you're ready. And now I'm showing you I'm interested in how you're going through this struggle.
That reminds me of a previous guest, Austin Graff. He and his wife were doing an amazing job with their daughter. And he said that one time when he picked her up from school, and I'm going to get the quote a little bit wrong, but I'll get the concept. She was just like, Papa, I'm just too tired to talk right now. I just don't have it in me. And he was like, okay. And they rode home in silence. And I'm just like, mind blown. I'm like, that's not the way that we've been taught. Oh, no. Now she's disrespecting her dad. I was absolutely blown away when I heard that. She has such a bright future ahead of her with parents that are that in tune and that open to understanding. I was just like, that was amazing.
And when we get into the dynamic that you telling me your story is how you show me that you care about me, or me listening to your story is how I show you I care, then the act of actually telling the story is performative.
All right. Can you say that again? Because that's worthy of repeating. One more
so
time.
If I have not identified my interest in your story, like, hey, tell me what the coolest thing at practice is, because I love to see it through your perspective and I always get more energy, right? I've identified why I want to hear it, identified what I get out of it, right? If that's not happening, and this is for the majority of us, I'm going to ask you about your day, because that's what's going to make me feel like I'm doing my job as a parent. And if you tell me about your day, then I know you care about me, and vice versa. The exchange, the story you're telling me, is not about value for me. It's a performance to show we're okay.
Okay.
I'm doing it because I'm a good parent. And that's fine. Again, but like that idea that I am going to show up, I want that safety, I care about you and I care about your story, opens the gate of, hey, when you're ready, I would really love to hear what the best part of your day is. And I know that if you're not ready, if you don't want to, if you're not in a position to, I don't want you to share that story with me, because what I really want is the story, because I care about you and I'm interested. I don't want the story so that I can feel like I did my job as a parent or a partner or whichever.
Yeah.
And I don't require you to listen to me as a means of showing me that you're interested. I want you to be interested. And once we take off the rules of that showing you're interested isn't listening to everything I say for a specified amount of time.
Yeah.
But like actively engaging. My wife does this so great right now, because I love to tell her what I'm doing. And sometimes I get really expressive at the end of the day. And we go on a 3 or 4 mile walk virtually every day with the dogs. And if I'm really excited about something and I'm telling her, she'll engage and ask questions. And then now, instead of jumping into, and we do, I'm more introverted, so it happens more one way than the other. Usually it's the other way. If we're talking about women and men, the man is the one talking less. It's the opposite in our relationship. But what she'll do is, hey, what part of my story you're interested in today? And it's such a great check. It's such a great check. Every once in a while, I'll jokingly say, no, I'm not, but it hits me like, oh, yeah, no, and I'll remember, oh, how did it go with this client? Or how did you, tell me about this, or, you know what I mean? And,
right.
Or I'll be able to read it and, oh, wow, like there's something here you want to share. And so I can read in that moment a little bit, oh, tell me about how you got through today, right? Because I know there's a challenge there. Like, tell me about, there's something exciting here. Like, tell me about the exciting thing. You obviously want to tell me something. Like, tell me the exciting thing. And now we've given each other sort of an invitation, if you will, to have what we call in the program, a mutual value exchange. And that's what we believe connection is. It's the mutual value that is derived when someone shares an individual experience. It's that the sharing of one person's experience leaves both people better.
That's some great clarification.
And if you think about our conversation just now, like I have an understanding of gratitude that I would have never. I mean, not that I would, but I certainly didn't have before the conversation. Because now I'm thinking about, oh, wow, what a great, and we talk about building gratitude on these calls and these interactions. Like we often tell people, don't ask people what they're grateful for, ask them where they felt grateful recently, and you get a whole different approach to gratitude, right? But what you talked about is just in this intentional sharing of story, we're building gratitude. And for me, we're like my group of 4 that we met this morning, that we've been meeting for 8 years, and the groups that are on our community, we're creating gratitude each day because of the interaction, and I not even thought about that. Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing.
And so in your story, I and everybody listening derived value. And part of that I get to take ownership for was because I stayed focused on what I was interested in clarifying the story and not assuming that I knew what you were talking about and jumping in to say, wait, how did this happen? Right?
Right.
What is behind this? And the things that sounded interesting to me, I just checked on. Right? Wait, you were hopeful at your lowest point? Where the hell did that come from? Right? Oh, wait. So what's a muscle that lets that happen? Yeah. And then it got real cool because you could almost feel like we're both in new ground. We're exploring this story together, right? When people talk about connection, we talk about it in the feeling, but I think that understanding it as this mutual value exchange can help us more purposefully create it.
Hate to overuse term, but are there any shortcuts or nope? Takes the intentionality and the time that it takes?
No, for sure. I think it's, so one of the ways that over this time we look at connection is most of us think about connection as a binary situation, meaning I have it or I don't, we're connected or we're not. And I don't think both the research bears that out, but also when we think about connecting with someone, if we think about it in binary, I was connected or I wasn't connected, I think we miss a lot. Because the interaction that we had probably led to a higher degree of both of us. I know for me, now I feel like I understand you more and I can see where I relate and where our stories overlap. That's the connection and the value there, right? Which leads to increase in trust, those sorts of things. But if we only think about it from that standpoint, we're not connected unless we have this big, deep, meaningful conversation. We miss a lot of opportunity for, okay, tell me the best thing that happened today. And tell me in 30 seconds. And while we're not connected so much, if you were a stranger out in the, I just had coffee, right? Hour and a half ago. And barista, he said, how was your day? And I was fine. How was yours? And he said, oh, it's good. I was like, ooh, what was one good part about it? And he was like, cinnamon roll this morning. He said, I just had a rad cinnamon roll. It's like, man, that's interesting. Think about how many of some of the best moments in our life have to do with food. And so, oh yeah, and he started saying one of the top 5 things of something else. And we left. That was the end of the conversation. Now, I'm not giving him keys to my house tomorrow.
Right.
So we're not at a trust and what we call accountability level of connection. But we did feel a little less alone in the moment, right? We did see each other a little bit more as a human, a bit less as a transaction, and that happened in 30 seconds. But it required me to do something uncomfortable because I had to break that sort of habitual pattern of how was your day, how was your day? And when that happens, I'm like, we're good, I'm out, right? I feel it. And do this a lot. I know what the feeling is like on the other side, but it's a bit like, I think about it this morning. I went for a run this morning. And I've run 100-mile marathons or ultra marathons. I know what it feels like and how beneficial it is. But I haven't run for a week and a half because we were doing some construction at the house. And I can tell you that it was hard to get my can out of bed this morning to go run with the dog, even though I knew how beneficial it was going to be. And it did. I feel much better today. And that's the same as the interaction. It's that moment of, oh, I could take the easer out and say, how was your day? Or I could have just a little bit of discomfort on my end. To open the potential for something more interesting, more valuable, more human to come out of the other person. And it can be big and meaningful and more complete, like the success map you and I just walked through. Mm-hmm. But it can be an interaction too, right? And some of my best experiences using this model have been just happenstance interactions that I had no plan on. I just didn't want to say, how was your day one more time?
Well, this may have kind of a tie in here where at the end of 2017, I was reviewing, this has a stronger tie now after this conversation. At the end of 2017, I was reviewing the year, and I was like, all I'm doing is going home to work. Kids are now either in college or they're very much on their own. And so it's my wife and I, and then the people at the office, and long commute. So I'm like, I'm not connecting with people. And so I need to do something intentional. So I started off, 2018 was going to be my hashtag year of connection. I invested time and money to have intentional conversations, and the more different from me that somebody was in any of the identities, the better. And I had 150 conversations that ranged from 20 minutes to 3 hours over the course of 2018. That was huge, and some amazing people, still dear friends with many, and many of them were random people. Right? It was, okay, how can I make a initial connection, and then how can we follow up for a longer conversation? And a couple of them were just very impromptu conversations that went long. But I see now where that came from, because in 2017 is where we had what we talked about earlier. Yeah. So no doubt at the end of the year, I was recounting on this and saying, okay, if this hope, gratitude, connection, that is what I need. I find joy in that, and it gives me life. Then that led to that whole year of connection thing. And then I did it again in 2019, but not as many people, but then a whole 2020 thing and all this other stuff. So I would say,
and now you're trying to do it on a podcast.
Right. And there's very much a through line for how I see the world. I can be very extroverted and interact with a lot of people, but if I go into a party, I am not the guy that's going to flit from person to person. I can do that, but that's not where I find the most joy. The most joy that I'll have is finding someone and have a deep conversation.
Yeah.
That's absolutely where I'm at. And so I would submit is a podcast is very much a continuation of just that. It's, hey, let's have this conversation. I was talking with somebody yesterday. She's asking me about the podcast. She's like, is it a 15-minute one? I'm like, you can't have a conversation, like legit conversation, I would say, in 15 minutes if you're going to explore a few different things. I'm like, no, it's longer, and we take the time that it needs. But that when we started in the story, I'm now seeing this very much thread leading to up to this point and doing the podcast and being as a venue for me finding joy, but also how this experience that perhaps I would hope this buddy of mine, David, experiences in our relationship. Wow.
Together is a book written by Vivek Murthy. The current Surgeon General wrote a book in 2019 called Together. It's a book on loneliness, pretty fundamental in the development of this whole programs that we started really in 2020. A neurobiologist who talked about our entire identity, our understanding of ourselves as a communal construct. And so there's a lot of this sort of work of understand yourself. We understand ourselves in community. Like every interaction we have with a human being is furthering or lessening our understanding of ourselves. And this is what we really need about understanding connection in this way. I very much believe, because so much of this work is based off work like Matthew Lieberman and Naomi Eisberger and neuroscience in the social cognitive neuroscience space that are helping us understand connection a lot more. This is how we're supposed to do it. This is our individual story does not exist outside of community. Then if you think about your purpose in life, nobody has a purpose that doesn't involve other people. None of us have goals that don't involve other people. And yet we're sort of conditioned into this very individualist mentality. And one of the things we do in our 2-day experience is what I tell people is our job in that 2 days is to help people see that loneliness and disconnection is an illusion your brain creates to try to keep you safe. But connection is the actual rule. Connection is happening all the time. And what I mean by that is your story is you're never alone in that story. And I'm not saying that the effects of loneliness aren't real. The effects of disconnection aren't real. I'm not saying that for a second, that we can't feel disconnected. No, those are absolutely real, happen all the time. But what's happening is our brain is trying to keep us from being kicked out of the pack. The challenge in that is we have not been taught how to find acceptance and belonging through someone else's story. And everybody knows we can do that unconsciously because every single one of us have watched a movie that we were the main character, right? We can all think about that movie that we were watching and we were invested because they were telling our story. And we got done with that movie and oftentimes we're crying because we feel less alone. And what I am convinced of more and more every day is that is available in every person we interact with. We just haven't been taught how to find that story. Like you were just talking about that low point in 2017, and man, I know that point, different than yours. But my curiosity about how you found hope is that I've been in that spot and not been able to, you know what I mean? Like struggle to find hope. And so you telling me how you did it was like you telling me how to live, like how to survive that moment. So what we're doing broadly, what I think we're designed to do, and where I talked about in the beginning, my perspective of questions changing from how do I make somebody feel better? How do I get them to change? Is how do I find myself in the other person's story? I don't control whether anybody else asks me about my story. I have no control over that. I can influence it, right? I can create a whole company where people ask questions, right? But I don't have any control over if people engage me with questions. I hope to develop those type of relationships but what I do have control over is how I engage other people. And just like on this interaction with you, like you telling me about being in that moment means I'm not the only one that has had that moment. Like I'm less like, oh, yeah, it's not just that I relate to what you're saying. It's that you sharing that with me makes me feel less alone. Means that I'm less alone. And you're on the other side of the country. We've never talked before. And all of a sudden now we both leave with a heightened sense of connection because we're seeing ourselves in the other person's story. And we can do that with one story. My story isn't necessarily coming out. But again, the mutual exchange of value from an individual experience. It can happen either direction. Yeah.
I appreciate that concept of finding yourself in the other person's story, because I had heard recently regarding public speaking, and what you get up on stage and you share is really less about your story. It's about the individuals that are sitting in the seats being able to relate to that story. And to think about how to walk into interactions with that assumption, already be leaning forward and saying, I am going to come into this conversation looking for how I can understand the world better, understand me better in hearing that in whatever story it is they're sharing. Certainly seems that it would increase the chance of now me being curious about it. Now, hey, what is that? I'm trying to solve that problem in me, or I've had that problem. Now that curiosity and those questions would come naturally.
That idea of connection is finding something in common. Connection is finding the experiences that are common. I'm not looking for what we have in common. I'm going to find myself in your experience because we're just talking about things that are common. Going through a challenge, going through a low point, like being happy, being proud, all of those are common experiences. They're human experiences.
Right.
And I can find them in anybody. Yeah. Like and because
Whoa,
of
whoa,
that,
whoa. Are you saying
yeah.
that we can even do that across the political divide? What?
It's
What?
funny. Everybody goes political on this. Every time we do like the in-person workshops, they're like, we need to get politicians in this. It's like, well, let's do it with each other first.
A friend of mine, Philippa Hughes, after the 2016 election, she started having blueberries and cherries dinners where she would invite folks over from different sides of the political spectrum. Like I'd gone to one dinner that she hosted at an art gallery, the Phillips Collection in DC, and I think there were 100 of us. So it was a good sized group. And we were paired up with somebody who was politically different. And the goal was go around and look at the art and talk about the art. So now it became that thing over here. It gave an opportunity for us to connect on something outside of just knowing we have opposing views, to allow for an opportunity to maybe connect on some of the lived experience, human experience, and that can make at least a conversation where I don't hate you because you're on the opposite aisle.
I always remember old stories about in the early 80s when Ronald Reagan was elected and then the leader of the Democratic Party, I forget the name, but at that time, people would go and have dinner with each other that were on opposite sides. There was more interaction. And there was also, and I remember growing up, people don't talk about politics or religion at the table. And I always was like, oh, I was a poli-sci minor, right? And in college, and I was like, oh, I love talking about politics.
Right.
And we can't, I'm not saying we don't, but there's a difference. And I think in today's age, I used to love to talk about politics because we were talking about ideas, not people, right? I love the intellectual exercise of what does this mean and what does that mean? But now people don't talk about politics. Now we talk about politics as a way of fitting in, not belonging, not acceptance, fitting in. And I love Brene Brown's delineation on that. They have different terms for it, like a value signal or something. I just think that there are better ways to communicate our values and the things we care about and the things that are important and meaningful to us. And the more I authentically approach someone's values and interests and purpose through exploring their experience, the more space that person has in potentially listening to my opinion. For me, it's an efficiency thing at the base level. I don't like to waste time. I hate trying to talk people into stuff. I don't like trying to convince people all day long. What I find is that the more connection you have with somebody, the less convincing you need. Like, full stop. And it's so much richer. The first year we did this, we had these experimental calls on Zoom. I had this unique position of, we had over 200 people jump on to have a conversation with a complete stranger for 10 minutes, where you would start with the question, what went well in the last week? And then you could only ask questions for 10 minutes. And then the stranger was going to do the same thing with you. Yeah. And what was amazing, again, that I had this unique vantage point, is I would see people come in, and this is in the times of, in the summer of 2020, where we were, the Black Lives Matter movement. Right. There was so much turmoil. And we had people come into these calls that I knew their background because I knew them directly or indirectly, or it didn't take very long to, oh, yep, okay, here. And then I was purposely, I don't know, that might be the first time I finally said it, that generally we do the breakout rooms just random, but there were plenty of times where because for the first 6 months, this was just a experiment I was doing because I wasn't on the road anymore. And because this is something my friends and I have been doing for 8 years every week. And so I would throw them in this room, but I would throw people in a room knowing full well, if they knew each other's opinion, the conversation would be over. And I can't count how many times people have come out of that conversation saying, I feel like I could go camping with this person. And I'm just like, but I think what happens is that, like, initially I was like, yeah, no, you can't. Like, that's going to break down. But But what I realized, because we have people that show up to the calls or have been a part of the program for 4 years, right? That we call them the OGs, right? That still come around because all the programs are progressive in as much as nothing's designed to do as a one and done. Like
Okay.
the basics program that you started to take, that like when people sign up, they have access for a year, and we update it every month. There's new stuff in it every month because we very much come from the standpoint of we are constantly improving this because that's how humans grow. But anyway, in that 4 years, there's been people that have been since we first had that initial interaction, and they are absolute best friends with people that they know now. They're both on the other side of the political spectrum, and they don't care, right? Because they see each other as humans first. And we have a lot of applications for this in business and sales, a lot of really functional things it does for the culture of a company. But I think fundamentally what we're trying to do is change the way people see each other. If I can look around and see the value in the people around me, that's going to change how I interact with them. And it's going to absolutely change what we can do together. And that's when I talked about at the beginning, like the shift that happened for me is that I looked at questions as a tool to get people to change or to move or to do these things. And that's still true. But fundamentally, it's the first step in changing how we view each other. And every time I have this conversation with people, I get so much out of it. And in terms of my optimism for the world, that the more we can have other people do it, then I'm not saying it's the cure, but I'm certainly saying that it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a journey, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. This is good stuff. Let's move towards wrapping up, because my thought is that another bite at the apple, maybe another 30 minutes, and I also need to be respectful of your time as well.
Right.
But with that said, I'll take another small bite at the apple and say, so any other thoughts or encouragements about how questions might be used that we haven't touched on already?
Nothing really out of the gate. We use this approach to change how you react when somebody shares a problem, how do you react when somebody comes to you with a challenge. We use the process for how even organizations approach goals, goal setting, and acknowledgement of goals, because in all of those is a chance to extract the story, to build connection, and in doing so, improve performance like considerably, because we're really just designing humans to interact the way they're supposed to, or the way we're designed to. And we've been sitting around the campfire sharing stories since the dawn of time. What we think this process is taking that thing that is built into our DNA and making it an efficient, changing how we approach, being much more purposeful and intentional than we've ever had to be as humans in doing that quickly and effectively. And operationalizing it, which sounds like taking the humanity out of it, but what we found is that the more we operationalize it, the more then it becomes a habit, and the more we experience what we're supposed to.
I would submit having a template would be helpful in that lots of different forces, perspectives, opinions, and other structures have been working their own magic for good or evil on us all these same years between the time that we were sitting around the campfire until today. At times there's a need to go back to what it used to be.
And a structure that's more fit for the reality of today. Like our environment has changed faster than the brain can adapt to. And so we need structures that help the brain thrive in that new environment. And that's what, when our certification program is 6 months long, and that's really the design in there. It's like how to take this structure and apply it with other people, with a relationship with yourself, but also then how to use it for even growth and development in an organization or with yourself, and take this structure and actually then move into where it will transform your coaching practice, your leadership, your sales, but most importantly, how you approach relationship by simply starting with the fundamentals of what I'm getting in communication.
Beautiful. Well, where is the best place for folks to engage with you and learn more about what you are excited about?
We have a free community. So if you go to findinggood.com, in the resources, they'll be in there. And the community is community run. So there's starting to be practice sessions from other people that went through the certification. We want that to be free. We want that to be community run, and it's growing. So there's places you can get free downloads in there. We have a once a month, The Good We Found, we call it, that we're doing on the 15th, that we try to create a free guide each month so people can go there. But if you want to get into it, go and sign up for the basics. And that's like the toe in the water, the program you have access to for a year that will get you started on the basic framework and how to apply that with other people. But you can always find me on the social media, although I try to interact on it, but not with it. So oftentimes that means people leave comments and interact, and I really try not to be tied to it too much. And I'm also, there can be a lot of negativity on there. And so I try to be mindful about how much I'm engaging with that. So if you commented to me on social media, I'm sorry I didn't respond. If you direct message me, I'm a little more likely. If you email, I will respond.
Nice. I will link in the show notes to all of these different resources. And if the toe in the water is joining a community group or the basics course, then going to view that the water exists and seeing Brian on social media, I highly encourage. He does break down many of these questions that we've done, but through this practical application he's encountered with the people in his life and in the communities. As I said at the top, I had saved many of these just as a point of reference and have it as a resource. Brian, thank you, sir. I appreciate your time, your expertise, your experience, and also drawing me out and helping me to see this through line between some dark days and even this very conversation we're having. So thank you, sir. I appreciate you being here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Now I have a new story to share on the socials.
Nice. For those who have joined us through the gift of technology, thank you for being here. Questions changed my life for the better, as we talked about today. Brian provided a great example of effective questioning and listening techniques while providing helpful tools for you to apply. At the opening, I promised a listener discount. Go to findinggood.com/the-basics and use the promo code
Curated Perks 2024.
You will receive a $26 off the $125 basic course, so less than $100. It's a great way for you to grow, to learn, and just find the appreciation of how connection can matter. There you will find a community actively putting these same techniques into practice. Please take all you have learned here and be a light to those around you. Gratitude shout out to Beauty Pill for the show's music and producer Ben Ford for the technical help. This episode was recorded on Piscataway land, and please engage with this episode in some manner. Download, follow, save, like, share, or comment about something that resonated. This action ensures that we are engaging the questioning community. So until next time, keep questioning.